going to disconnect the battery, remove this panel, take the negative side off, use a 10mm socket, loosen up the nut right here, and set that aside. We're going to take this cover off, use a T30 socket, take these 4 screws out. And there should be another one right there. And grab the cover, just slide it up a little bit and slide it out. Now we'll take these 4 screws out, use the same T30 socket. And grab this cover right here, slide it back a little bit, and then you should be able to pop it off over here. Just pops off. Disconnect the connector right here, and just use a pocket screwdriver. Just get underneath here, slide it up a little bit, and disconnect it. Loosen up this worm clamp right here. Just use a straight blade screwdriver. Should be good. And slide that off. We're going to disconnect the clamps all around here. And slide that off. Then you can take the air filter out as well. Grab the box, slide it up, take it out. We're going to take this crossover bar off. Use a trim tool, take these push pins off. Pop those out. And this just slides up. Then take these bolts off on both sides using a 13mm socket. And grab the bar and slide it out. Now we're going to remove the cabin filter. Just twist these little twists, these little locks, and slide the filter out. Now using a T30 socket, take these screws out. And grab this panel. I'm just going to slide it forward and like twist it out. Oops, the clips popped off. Loosen up these bolts. You're going to use a hex socket, a 5mm. Another one right there as well. And just grab the cover, slide it up, and out of the way. Loosen up this worm clamp right here. Just use a straight blade screwdriver. Then we can take this snorkel off. Grab it, wiggle it a little bit, try to slide it out. Now pull that off and remove this wire. Just slide that off that bracket. You can disconnect the connector for the throttle body. Just push down on the connector and slide that off. Disconnect this connector right here. Just use a straight blade tool. Slide that out and out of the way. There's another wire right here. Slide that off the bracket, out of the way. I'm going to use a 10mm socket, take the bolts out of the throttle body. pull those out. There's 4, 2 on the bottom, 2 on the top. Grab the throttle body and slide it out. There's a wire that goes down here. You want to just slide that wire out from behind that bracket there. You need to remove this hose right here. Just squeeze on this tab right there. One on the back side, one on the front. And try to slide it off. If you have to, you might be able to use a pick. And pull that off. Slide that out of the way a little bit. There is a bracket underneath here. There's 2 bolts attaching that bracket. You're going to use a T30 socket to take those bolts out. There's one here. There's another bolt over here. Further back, it's a little tricky to see. Take those out. Right there. Now that bracket is loose, but there's that other one back here I gotta get. A little bit tricky to get this back one. You could, if you struggle with it now, you could wait till you get the intake loose and then try to take that out. But it's loose enough I can do it by hand now. I'm just gonna take the socket. With that bolt out, that's separated down below. Now we can go up top. There's a connector right here. It's for the oil pressure sensor. Just disconnect that, slide that aside. Disconnect these connectors because they go through the intake. Right there, and also right here. Slide that off. Just have these out like that. Those are going to go through when we pull the intake off. Now I'm going to take this bracket off. This goes to the fuel line. Use a T25 socket. Remove this bolt. Slide that bracket out of the way. There's a connector right here. Just push down on the tab, slide that off, slide that wire out of the way. There's another wire under here. Just slide that wire off that clip, just so that's out of the way. That's good. This hose on the back here, on the valve cover, that has to get disconnected. You're just gonna squeeze and slide it off. If you have to, you can use a pick. Slide underneath there. Try to pop that side off. Squeeze that, pop that off. Now I'm going to take these nuts and bolts out for the intake. Use an 11mm socket. Just be careful, don't drop the nuts. I'm just starting from the middle and working my way out. Although it doesn't really matter which way you take them out. Last one in the back. I'm going to take these 3 studs out. Use an E14 socket. the intake. And this hose might be in your way. Just push down. Slide that out of the way. Underneath, there is a hose connected right here. I'm going to disconnect that hose. Just push down on the tab. Slide that off. These wires are going to pull through down here. Have those out of the way. Underneath here, we have this connector that we want to disconnect. Just use a pick or a straight blade screwdriver. Just get underneath here, disconnect that connector. Slide that off. Now very carefully, should be able to roll the intake a little bit. Just slide it out of your way. There's another connector right here. Slide that off. And that's it. When you were pulling the intake off, you might have had a wire that went through the center of the intake, and that's connected to the starter right there. You just want to push down on this wire, this little tab right there, and slide that off. Ours was just dangling, it was just hanging loose because it didn't have that clip on there. So, but if you're struggling with that, make sure you disconnect that. Take this nut off right here, use a 13mm socket. Take that nut off and grab the wire and slide it off and out of the way. Now we're going to take the starter bolts out. There's one located down here, but there's also one coming in from the back side of the belt housing on the transmission. You want to use this type of socket. On this back bolt, we're going to use an E14 socket. Take the back bolt off. Luckily, it's not in there too tight. Grab that bolt and slide it out. On this front bolt, we're going to use an E14 socket. Get right on the bolt. Loosen that up. And slide it out. And just grab the starter and just slide it out. And I'll take the starter, slide it in position. Get the bolt started underneath. I'd have to wiggle it. When you replace the starter motor, it's recommended that you replace these bolts because they are a torque to yield bolt. When you go to tighten them, you're going to have to torque them all the way to the point where they're going to stretch. So put that in. And you want to torque these bolts to 14 foot-pounds. Do the best you can with that back one. It's a little bit tricky. Once you get it 14 foot-pounds, then you take an angle meter, if you have one, and you want to torque it an additional 90 degrees on this front bolt, and then an additional 180 degrees on that back bolt. Do the best you can. Now put this cable on, get the nut started. And you want to torque that nut to 9.5 foot-pounds. All right, connect this connector right here, lock it down. Should go down there. Just gonna take a little brake parts cleaner and a rag and just wipe around where the intake ports are. Make sure you don't get any sand down in there. But do that to all of them. You can just take a little compressed air and just make sure you get all the sand and dirt out of there. On the intake, do the same. Just wipe down with a little brake parts cleaner where the gasket's gonna go. And you wanna take off the old gasket. Just use a pick, get underneath here. Peel it up. Again, wipe it down. Just like that. Take the new gasket, line it up, and push it in. Even though it's round, it's still going to take the shape of the oval. Then you do the same with the other ones. All right, now I'll just slide this back in the way it came out. Just got to get past the alternator. There we go. And there's a couple of connectors we want to plug in underneath here. So we have these two connectors, one right there. That's the wider one. And then this one right here. Get those plugged in. There we go. That's in the correct position. And if you want to, while this is still loose, before we put the studs and the bolts in, you can get these screws started for this bracket underneath here. Put this hose on. Just make it a little bit easier. Take that little screw and just try to reach it down in there. Get that started. And then you can snug those bolts up. Just get in there, tighten those up. Those are tight. That's good. Before we put the intake completely on, remember there is these two wires that go through the center here. So you want to line those up, because after the intake's on, you won't be able to get those in place. So go through there. And you can line that up. Now line up the intake, and we'll get these studs started. So you skip the first one, go to the next three for the studs. Snug those down. And before we put the nuts on, just get the bolts started. And get the nuts started. I'm just going to snug these up a little bit. Now working from the center and working my way out, I'm going to torque these to 11 foot-pounds. I'm just going to alternate back and forth. And connect the connectors, slide the wires in the retainers, lock it down. There you go. And connect the oil sensor, lock it down. In the back, we'll hook up this hose, goes right to the valve cover. Lock that down. This bracket's going to go right there. That's for the fuel line. Get that bolt started and tighten it down. Snug it. Right under here, there's a connector. Line that up. Lock it down. And there's some wires that go in some brackets on the back. Slide those back in place. Goes right there. This wire is going to cross over this bracket in the back. That was like that before. Put these wires in the retainers. It's good like that. And this hose right here, connect that. Make sure that's out of the way. You want to replace the throttle body gasket, just use a pick, get underneath there, peel that off, put a new gasket on, and take the throttle body, make sure you got a new seal on there. And slide it in place. Get the bolts started. Snug these down. And then torque these to 80 inch-pounds. Now connect the connector, lock it down. Now line the snorkel up and push that on. twist it back and forth a little bit. Get it to lock on there. And you can tighten that worm clamp down. Just snug it up. Make sure it's tight. There's a connector right here. This is going to go in here. Line that up. And lock it down. And put the airbox in. Line it up. And press it down. Put your air filter in. Put the top part of the airbox on. Line up the snorkel. You can plug in the mass airflow sensor. And tighten down the worm clamp. Snug it down. Put this intake on. Line that in place. Lock it down right here. Now I'm going to put these screws in and tighten them down. Now slide this cover in. Put these 4 screws in. Tighten them down. And line this cover up. Get those 4 bolts started. Slide this panel in place. And tip it down. Put these bolts in. Get all 4 of those started. Tighten those down. Slide the cabin filter in place. And put the cover down, lock these pins down. Put this bar in place, line it up, get all the bolts started. Tighten those down. Now take the push pins, line those up, and lock them down. Do the same on that one. And connect the battery. Give it a wiggle, make sure it's snug.